to dive into creating a panning landscape. And what is panning? We're not panning for gold. In cinematography or film, and in photography as well as motion graphics, panning means swiveling a still or a video horizontally from a fixed position, like a person, not moving but just turning their head. This motion is similar to the motion of a person when they turn their head from left to right. In the resulting image, the view seems to pass by the person, but it reveals that the entire image is seen from a fixed point of view. And that just means their feet aren't moving, they're standing still. So I've pulled this diagram together to help us a little bit with what we're going to do. And in After Effects, we can create the illusion that we not only have a panning landscape, but that it is looping. And in theory, we're the only ones that know it's truly looping. To the rest of the world, it looks like it just keeps going, and the everything is moving consistently. So to do that, we utilize our current HD size of 1080 by 1920 pixels. And if we put two widths of 1920 next to each other, we can have a total of 3840 pixels. Then we can use this extra wide composition, because remember, we can make a composition at any size. We can take this extra wide composition and nest it inside a composition that is still only 1920 by 1080, and move that composition from left to right so that the first frame and the last frame that would show up on the screen are identical. So two of them next to each other moves pretty slow if you're doing 10 seconds for each layer of depth. Moving this width would move slower, obviously, than this width. So then we move into, let's do a medium. So three widths next to each other totals 5760 pixels. Now the fun thing about once you get up to three is that your center frame does not need to be identical. This could hold any type of content in it. If ours is going to be identical, it doesn't necessarily have to. But our first frame of artwork and our last frame of artwork that are spanning the left to right of our screen need to be identical. And you could continue this indefinitely, but one other layer, so 1920 by 4 would be 7680, and the two center widths of artwork do not need to be identical, just the first one and the last one. So what does that mean in terms of an animation? Let's dive into it. We're going to continue using our bouncing ball animation project, because eventually we're going to combine all of this. If you haven't done so already, make sure you name your bouncing ball composition. You can do that by going up to composition settings and change the name here to bouncing ball. Now, I have it in my project folder. I don't necessarily need to let it live out here on my timeline, so I'm going to close that for now so it just exists as an asset in my overall project. I'll get back to that later on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new composition. This composition is going to stay 1920 by 1080 because it's going to be our main overall composition that we start building art into. And we want to know that width as we're kind of starting this artwork. We're going to leave it at 10 seconds. We can leave our kind of pale gray. And then we can call this one Panning Landscape. Let's spell it right. And we could even name it overall, which would help in terms of because we're going to develop quite a few compositions in this next lesson. So knowing that this one's kind of the overall can help us. Okay, so here's this guy. Now, we know that our ball is sort of landing here. So we need to create a foreground that gives that ball some space. So the very first thing we're going to do is just a very flat green grass. Nothing too crazy. We're going to go up to rectangle. We are going to draw a rectangle. We're not going to freak out about the color right now because then we'll go up to fill. We can do this one at solid. We'll hit OK. We'll go back in And let's pick a green that's a little bit muted, nothing too bright and crazy. That feels pretty good. Click back to our arrow and click off. Now let's name this, hit return. Let's name this grass foreground. Because we're going to work in a foreground, which would be closest to us, a midground, which would be a little bit more distance, and then a background. But remember our image, our background is going to be our narrowest composition. Our foreground, which moves faster, will actually be our widest composition. So it won't necessarily be this grass. It's going to remain static, so that's fine for us. We're going to move some other parts. Okay, we're going to move our midground and our background. Our grass foreground can stay nice and flat like that. We could add to that if you want. Okay, let's hit save. Next, we're going to make a little bit of a road. We're going to kind of do this simple with a road in here, and then we'll do a sky as kind of our final background. That's those two slow moving compositional widths. So I'm going to come in with my rectangle again. Make sure you are not clicked on your layer. If you are and you start drawing, you're going to mess it up all into the same layer. So click undo if you do that. And click off of that layer before you start building up a road. So I'm going to build a road, and it's going to be a little bit above the center mark. Whoop. And I got it a little bit funker. I need to make it a little bigger. And I do actually want this road to end almost exactly at the end of the edge. That's going to help me when I'm duplicating, because remember, I need to have identical of this in a minute. So click on that road. Let's go change it to a gray so we know we're looking at a road. Let's not go crazy dark, but let's build off of that gray value, or off of that green value for a gray. There's our road. Again, click off of it. Now let's go in there, and we could do dotted lines, honestly, in quite a few ways. I'm going to show you how to use a pen tool to get that. So click back to your pen tool. Again, do not be on any of your layers. I can rename this to road. Click off of it. Now I can grab my Command plus. I could grab my arrow, and you can do it to whatever, feels right to you. But let me just show you for now. I'm going to give it a little perspective. So I'm going to let the front be a little wider, taller, and then the back be a little shorter, so it sort of looks like perspective. I'm going to start my line, click. I'm going to come to this far side, hit shift, and then click again right on the edge. Boom. Now I'm going to dive into this layer. And this time I'm going to actually dive into contents. So we haven't been doing that. Shape, stroke, dashes, add, and let's change the dashes. You want these to be pretty big. I think I typed in there about 500 might work. And I also need to give it a stroke color, so it's not showing anything right now because I don't have a stroke color. So let me go in and get a little bit of a golden-y color. There we go. Now we can start to see that. Perfect. And you really just want a couple of lines. Now, could I have just made a few lines? Sure, but I like the math that it does for me when it's doing that. Okay, let's hit save at this point because we're going to start our first pan, which is going to be cool. So come up here. Let's rename this to road lines. Now we're going to click, hold shift, and click. We're going to take these two layers and we're going to pre-compose them into a wider composition. So just watch for a second. I'm going to right click, pre-compose. We will call this moving road, so we know what we're working with. Now I'm going to dive into it. So double click into it, and we're going to adjust those settings. So remember, for this one, we want to go at we're going to go 3 times the amount because we're pretty close. We want this to move pretty fast. So we're going to give this 3 levels. So kind of a medium, 3 widths across, so our 5760. So not as slow as something behind it would go. So let's go up to composition, composition settings. We're going to change this width to 5760, which is 3 blocks of compositional width. Don't change anything else. Hit OK. Command minus so you can see everything you're working with. So now this one directly in the middle is good. Let's copy and paste it very carefully. Command C, Command V. Nudge those. I like to use Shift and my arrows actually. I find that if I use my mouse to do this, it can get a little wonky. Zoom in. Spacebar over. Zoom in. And that looks pretty good. Look how close I got that right to the edge, right away. This one looks pretty good. So that's 2 widths. 1, 2. Let's get our third. And we want it to look exactly like this. So we are just now going to copy, Command C, Command V, nudge to the left. I'm using Shift to make it go pretty fast. And my arrows. Now zoom in, spacebar over, and really check it out. You don't want that little line. See that little line? That's not good. Grab these 2 layers, shift them over. There, now that line disappears and now it's perfect. Okay, look at this nice road. Let's back up so we can see the whole thing. Okay, and then let's even kind of readjust just a little bit so that we see. We'll put these on the left and these on the right and these in the middle. Now in theory, your middle one, I wouldn't mess with the gray road because it needs to combine here and there, but you could do a little something different and it would still loop. I'll show you that later. You could have a car right here or something, only in the center 19, 20 pixels. The second you go over those, you're going to start to jack with your first frame and your last frame. Now let's do that so you see what I mean by frames. I'm in my moving road. I want to go back to my panning overall. Here I am. Command minus. Now look how beautifully it has set up this extra wide composition. All I'm going to do is move this composition, sorry my mouse is tweaking, all the way over, holding Shift, far over to the left. Zoom in to make sure I am getting that perfect. Yep. And then I'm going to keyframe a position. Go over to the far side of your timeline and move it all the way till it's perfectly positioned there, which look, it just jumped, it is not. There we go. Now what I mean by first and last keyframe are the same, check this out. Last frame, first frame. See how it looks like they don't move, but in reality, that thing's trucking. Now watch it play in a loop. Just keeps on going. Now let me show you the trick I was saying. So go back to my moving road. In my centered marks, now I like to create in my square. Then I like to duplicate it after that. That square helps me know where my marks are, my sides, my corners, things like that. Okay, so now I'm gonna go in, let's add a tree, something. We'll add a little tree and we'll put it right here, a bush. And we'll obviously take off a stroke because the bush doesn't have a stroke. Everything else doesn't have a stroke in here. And we'll get a green. And we'll get kind of a nice green, whatever. And wait, okay. Now let's go test my theory. Back into panning overall. Now watch as that guy comes in. He's on top of our grass. That's fine. Our grass isn't actually moving. It's just a static rectangle. If you want that grass to move, you need to be setting up a 4 wide identical first and last frame composition for your final. Okay, so that's cool. You can see how that works. Let's go do a very similar thing, but with clouds. So inside this guy, I want to build a little bit more depth. I'm going to take this, I'm going to lock that. I want similar green grass. I'm just going to copy paste. This time I obviously want it to go behind the road, and it doesn't necessarily matter if it's, you know, taking up a little extra behind it as long as it's tucked in behind it. And then because I've studied atmospheric perspective, I know I should add a little bit of blue, look over here, to this green grass, a little bit of blue and a little bit of a fade. And that those things will help it sit back into space for me. I'm going to hit save because we're halfway there. Okay, now within this composition, let's go start creating our sky. I'm going to grab a rectangle. I'm not going to be clicked on any layers. That will mess up what we're doing. And I'm going to make, kind of like I did with my grass, but I'm going to make a nice blue sky. I'm going to have to move it in a minute because it's on top. And I'm going to adjust this to a nice faded blue, but that's off of my greens. Look how these start to really like look nice together. That's because it's a proper color palette and not just random colors. Okay, let's go rename some layers. Sky. Let's call this one grass midground. And then we've got our foregrounds. That keeps things nicely organized. Save. All right, let's go just create some really simple kind of circular clouds. So I'm going to go in with my ellipse tool. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit with Command plus, and I'm going to make 2 little sets of clouds. And I actually do want to keep them kind of circular because that's just how I'm going to roll with this one. Perfect circle, make it white, that's fine. Click off, click in, click off, click in. Works for a little one, and then I'm just going to copy this to make kind of a similar but different over here. Let's make some adjustments. Whoop. Let's make this just a little bit bigger. If you have trouble with your scaling, you can always hit S, get into scale, and then you can start to adjust that. See, it's not liking where my my anchor point is. There we go. Isn't that annoying? Whoa, cap locks. Be careful if you get that. Okay, so I got this bigger one, I got a smaller one. They're kind of different, and that works. Perfect. Now, I need only the clouds. I do not need the sky. Let me close these so we know what we're working with. Pull this up. Okay, I'm going to grab these layers and I'm going to pre-compose them. Ooh, right click. Pre-compose. We'll call this moving clouds. We will dive into that composition And it's kind of one of the reasons why I usually use not pure white for backgrounds. I like to have just a slightly off color so you can see when things actually are white, like these little cute clouds. Okay, so now my clouds, I want them to go very, very slow. And remember, my slowest, it's all relative, but since we set up the road with 3 widths, we want to go slower with only 2 widths. So let's go into our, oh, before I do that, when I widen this composition, it's just going to leave these in the middle. But I really need to set up some markers to know where some of my corners are. So I'm going to dive into this and set up some little guides that I'll then erase. Right here. And then again, right here. Okay, those will be helpful down the pipeline. Back up. Now I can see them. Now let's go change our composition settings. Let's change our width to our 3840, which is 2 times our 1920. 3840. Leave everything else the same and hit OK. So you see how it puts it right in the middle. But what I really want is this frame and this frame to be identical. So grab all of these things, including our guides, and nudge that over so that top right guide sits right where he's supposed to. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, duplicate, Command C, Command V, nudge over with our arrows. You're using all your hands. You're not going to learn this very complex program with using only your index finger to click on things. Okay, I want to dive into this guy, and he looks pretty good. All right. Now you can go in, you can delete these guides. Delete, 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 delete. Let's go back out to our main panning landscape. Here he is. Let's lock everybody else so we're just not jacking with anything. And now let's animate our clouds. Very simply, the first frame, hold Shift. Shift helps things stay aligned. Like, see how it clicks into place? If not, you can get things just a little bit off. Hit Shift, set that first frame. You can click P to get into your position. Start a time. Notice I was not at the beginning. Delete that. Go to the very beginning. Hit your stopwatch. Go to the very end. Move your guy all the way over to where you lined up, just on that left side. Double check your first frame and last frame. Looks good. Now let's watch. Reap the benefits. Because we set those clouds up at a much slower amount of width, slower type of composition in comparison to that moving road, you can see we've created kind of a mid-ground. That moving road's moving at a pretty decent pace. The clouds are moving at a much slower pace. We've added a little atmospheric perspective with a slightly lighter, bluer green. We've kept in color compositions by utilizing some of our same colors when developing our other colors. So start with one color and work from it in that color picker. When you are done, make sure you hit save. And at this point, you're ready to submit this layered composition for grading. Let me know if you have any questions.